welcome to another Bench Talk series. I'm your host, Konstantina, Chief Product Officer of Innovation Sprint. And today we host on our virtual bench, Mitchell Silva, CEO of Esperity and Patient-Centrics, to discuss on patient centricity in clinical trials. So, Mitch, welcome. So I think you will agree that we have noticed and the culture of clinical research is slowly evolving, and from being directed by research to being directed by the patients and the patient needs and those who care of them. So I'm looking forward to learn more on how this patient engagement is achieved and what's your experience in delivering such services to both patients and pharma. So before we start, just give us a little, few insights on yourself and your drive to co-found these two initiatives that involve patients.
Okay, thank you very much, Konstantina. Thank you for inviting me for this talk. So I actually started this journey of actually becoming a patient entrepreneur that led me to start this business because of my own experience as a patient and a researcher. So when I was doing my PhD in health monitoring as a bioengineer, I was very close in touch with researchers, with patients, and I really saw the potential, how technology can actually transform lives. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I became a patient myself and started participating in clinical trials where I actually saw there's a whole bunch of gaps that are there that we can really improve as an ecosystem. So this was really the drive to start Esperity, where we actually focus on empowering patients, so meaning to give them the tools and the capabilities to take more actionable actions in their healthcare to become more empowered. So, of course, clinical trials and treatment options is also one aspect of the full picture.
The major pain that pharma has, which is the patient adherence. So it's really hard for them to attract patients and harder to retain them. So tell us some key ways that you could improve access and patient awareness of clinical research through your initiatives.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we see in general that much more can be done to, first of all, make clinical trials aware with the broad public. There's only a little amount of patients that actually know what clinical trials are. There's a lot of misconceptions about it. So I think everything starts with awareness and education. And I think it's partly role of the authorities, the government as well, because if we want to stimulate innovation, it's important that actually people understand the process of drug development and understand what are trials, what is the difference between a phase 4 and a phase 1. So I think this can go both via education, even with high school, universities, etc., but also via private initiatives, such as pharma companies, for example. Secondly, I think what we also see is that when people have an idea that, they're or don't have an idea anymore about possible treatments, clinical trials should become a kind of obvious path to have a look at. And the problem there is that it's not obvious for patients where to look for clinical trials. The more we can set up systems, and this is also what we do, to actually guide patients from general awareness until actually searching for a clinical trial, saying where you have to go to as a patient, this will really facilitate I think patient recruitment and at the end also access to innovative medicines for patients that need it.
Sure, and I believe also that a lot of people with financial difficulties might see it actually as a viable care option for them, cancer patients, for example, are chronic patients and very costly treatments. So is that a perspective that patients are considering clinical trials for?
I think at the end it's mostly about survival, of course, and making sure you have access to the right treatment to improve. Of course, there's a big difference between healthcare systems as well, and also between, okay, is the drug reimbursed, yes or no? And if you participate in a trial, at the end, of course, it's if the drug is not reimbursed yet and you can have access, this helps. But at the end, I think the main driver for the patients is really just to have the best possible option for the treatment. And hopefully this reimbursement or whatever is needed to make it bearable for the patient and achievable will happen soon. And for this, we need more data, more patients. So in that scope, it's really important to make sure that we create this awareness. Recruitment is done in an optimal way. And a high quality way as well. And pricing, of course, can be seen as a motivation, but I don't think it's a prime motivation.
Yeah, sure. But also, I think patients should come much earlier on in the phase of clinical trials. So to start getting involving, and I think that's what you guys are doing as well. Try to involve them as early on as possible in the trial design, and try to see, is this actually feasible for a patient, to answer like 120 questionnaire, or visit twice a month a hospital outside his region. So do you see trial sponsors trying to involve patients much earlier on now?
That's a good point, and this is indeed where we see a big shift happening now in the ecosystem. Is that more and more everyone speaks about, okay, patient-centric design, patient engagement, and we actually help organizations, companies, universities to actually include the patient voice as much as possible. Now, what is very important there is, of course, when you are setting up a trial design, you're dealing with very specific topics, and as a patient to give input in these meetings, you have to have the right skills. So it's really important to, in certain phases in this drug development and in the conceptualization, to involve patient experts. And a nice source is, for example, EUPATI, the European Patient Academy of Therapeutic Innovation, where they actually educate patients to become knowledgeable in this field. And so this is one. The second part is, of course, then, okay, loose from design, etc. It goes further into actually the practicalities, the burden. So on one side, the first part of this conversation was about the design, which is more like, okay, the endpoints, etc., ethical frameworks. But then there's also something like, okay, routine blood tests, going to the hospital if you have disability, for example. There's a lot of things that researchers don't consider, which really has an impact on how the patient perceives and experiences the trial. So more and more we see that by involving patients early enough, you can really reduce the burden, and that will have an impact at the end on retention as well. And if you cooperate with patient organizations, this can also be a channel basically to create awareness about the trial, which could help at the end recruitment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they have their group of people. But okay, so of course it's difficult to get them on board, and but the innovation sprint getting into clinical trials from a more ICT or digital marketing point of view, we're like gamification, like giving rewards to people that walk, or that they have reached their goals. But this was something totally unheard and not at all wanted in clinical trials. And I'm wondering, I can see some signs that we can see some flexibility in that area now, and I really hope that it does. Do you see something similar happening?
Yeah, absolutely, Constantina. I really think that more and more we see that technology and gamification can really help us get rid of some of the pain points that we experience. And of course, we live in a very restrictive environment here, so there's a lot of questions. If you start motivating people, how will this impact the endpoints that you're measuring besides pure the therapeutic impact of the drug? There might be maybe some other impacts or other drivers that will trigger an impact. So from that point, there's always a big discussion. Okay, how far can you go in this? But anyway, more and more we see that with real-world evidence collection, behavioral change at the end, you really have to make sure you keep the engagement high. Even with very long trials, we see that there's sometimes a requirement to actually motivate people. So there's some very nice pilots actually that are ongoing to really test, okay, if we have certain triggers, much more gamified way of giving points and scores to patients, how will this actually make sure we can keep patients on the trial? So I'm very positive and optimistic. At the same time, I know it takes a whole bunch of discussions to actually get us through and to reach a consensus with all the researchers to implement something like this.
Because it's real life at the end, and people have different characters, and you have to, in a sense, personalize it and talk to people different ways in order to achieve your goals. So, but we are living in a very difficult situation with COVID and the pandemic, and of course you can't ask a patient, some social contact will do you good when you can't actually get out of the house, or you should go and exercise when you can only just walk around the block. So we see these things happening, but future trials, of course, are going that way. But is it far, you think? But since COVID, I feel it's getting closer. And what's your opinion on that?
No, absolutely. I think what we see here with COVID is that, okay, if we want, we can. And there have been a lot of pilots and even actual trials where you bring, instead of the patient to the hospital, the drug to the patient at home. Of course, it depends on, okay, what type of intervention and the disease, etc. But more and more we see that, okay, it's possible. It's possible from a technical perspective. It's possible from a regulatory perspective. So it's and a legal perspective. So it's really, I think, a momentum eye-opener now that things are accelerating. And more and more we will see this becoming a reality. This is clear.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to that, but I really hope pandemic clears out the way, but we keep good things.
Absolutely.
All major technical innovations have happened in difficult times. Well, wars and mostly, but also pandemics. So let's hope this leaves us with a couple of innovative techniques and some knowledge behind. So thank you so much for the time you've given us today, and hope to see you soon, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, and I also wish you good luck in this pandemic times. So thank you very much, and we'll speak soon.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.